Matthew. Yeah, no, that's good. We got that conflict of interest out of the way. You know, I'm a commercial member, have been for a long time, and when Matthew rang me, I said, I'll finally get something for my membership fees, a free lunch. Then he told me I had to speak, so that one, I'm still behind here. Anyway, yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk. Also, my wife and I also run another conflict of interest. I think I told Matthew, is we run about 25% of our own breeders with straight Brahmins for a few obvious reasons. But so I'll put that on the table as well when we go through these slides. I put this pack together, and please just put your hand up if you find any boring. I think you might find some of the information there interesting. And I got to the start of this week, and Matthew sent me a message saying, you know, you're right for later on. I thought, Jesus, what am I going to talk about? This Brahman crew, there any stud breeders or anyone involved in breed societies are a tough bloody gig to appease. Anyway, and would you believe yesterday I had the new Paraway CEO, Stuart Johnson. I don't know whether you can hear me if I talk outside. I don't like leaning over. But and he's offside of Michael Graham. We were taking them through Dinmore yesterday. They were in Brisbane. So there's a couple of fellas based in Orange. You can imagine what sort of country most of the Paraway business is, and we're going through the Dinmore processing shed. And if any of you have been there, we've got 4 chains in the boning room, and generally we can only run 2 chains at a time on grain fed. And coming straight down, we were standing there for about 20 minutes, half an hour. It was just full, magnificent carcasses. Every single one of them was a Brahman. And these guys, they turned around and said, "Just this, you know, why is there so many Brahmins coming down this chain?" And we said, well, that's our 100-day program. It's part of the program. We do about 5,000-6,000 a week at Dinmore of 100-day grain fed. Some of those are actually Brahmins. Anyway, we wheeled around. They were really impressive. I must admit, they were fantastic bodies. We wheeled around into the marshalling area where the graders and everyone marshal out the chillers. And they sort of, well, the way we marshal before it goes in the bone room is around Marble School. And Murray Wilson, who's been at that plant for a long, long time, said, "You want to see Brahmins? Come and have a look at this." Took me straight down this road. I kid you, this is not a lie. This is quite coincidental I'm here today. There's a whole 2 rows, so there'll be at least 80 bodies. And he said, "Come and have a look at this. 2 full rows, Marble School 3. 110 days on grain." And I've actually got the guys just digging up some data on where those cattle actually came from. So I thought, geez, this is like Christmas. I'm about to present to the Brahman Association, and here's this 3 score marble product coming through our boning room. So and I'll talk about one of our particular products that a lot of our Brahman cattle, grain-fed cattle, go into. We obviously process grass Brahman cattle as well, but it is a very successful brand, and we'll scoot that through photo. That photo there is actually that's money by a feedlot about a week ago. So just as a quick overview, our JBS business, so we're the largest food company in the world, as Matthew said, so we do about 38,000 cattle a week, 82,000 sheep, 37,000 pigs, and 130,000 fish, which is the salmon farm down in Huon Salmon. And about 15,000 employees, and 80 countries to the world, plus obviously domestically as well, we export to. Many of you may know the story of JBS, but that's a brief timeline. Obviously the old AMH business, as many people would know, was purchased in about 2007, and then they're their following acquisitions that they've pulled through at the moment, with the last one being the Huon Salmon. So we're in every protein in Australia except for chicken. However, chicken in North America for our business is massive. It's a big part of it, and it's astounding. It's something like 20 million chickens a day they process in North America. That's the spread of our plants. So many of you obviously know our northern plants: Townsville, Rockhampton, Dinmore, Beef City. So when we talk about the product brand, I'm going to talk about it later on. It actually gets packed in Rockhampton and Dinmore sheds, and I'll talk about a particular product. Our feedlot, so we've got about 158. We're just about full at the moment, so we've got about 158,000 on feed. The business has always been the largest feedlotter in the world. If we add up some of our long-term contracts, because we have cattle on other feedlots, we currently have around 250,000 head on feed at the moment coming through our programs. And that's everything from a Wagyu, an Angus, through to straight Brahmans. Like you name a breed, they're in that system. That's where we're currently killing them. So Dinmore's probably our biggest lift. So obviously you remember when we all ran out of cattle a few years ago, they shut the second shift at Dinmore, and we've now just put 900 people on since Easter, and have got our second shift going. So we're just a touch under 3,000 head a day at Dinmore, and we get to 3,400 straight after Christmas, with the option to. That's only 4 days a week, so then we can do an extra day with an extra 1,800 on a Friday once we get past Christmas. So that's so one of the beauties of the JBS business is the sheer volume allows drafting of product into certain brands, and quite often a lot of these brands are drafted when they come into feedlots or when they're actually booked in for slaughter. So we try and minimise the amount of drafting we have in our boning rooms, because it's so tight for space, and it's a very difficult process to do. So cattle destined for programs are generally drafted before they get there. This Royal program is the one we'll talk about a bit later, which is actually one of the oldest grain-fed brands. It's been going for well over 30 years now in the AMH JBS business, and an extraordinarily successful brand, particularly in the domestic market. We started doing a lot of supply chain mapping around sustainability and things, and it's actually quite interesting when you look at. So this is really just our northern plants, and that's the draw of the spread of the cattle that had come in from last year. So if you look at where a lot of those maps are, that's an extraordinary amount of either high content or crossbred Brahman cattle are in that system that comes through. Just for your own information, this is where our weekly, that's Australia as a whole. So you can see these trends. You would have seen the updated MLA data around numbers of cattle. So this is where we are now, and this is where we were a couple of years ago. So we're seeing that trend going up, which is obviously why processors are trying to add capacity, and fortunately with the extra cattle coming, we're seeing a lift in live exports, which will help take the pressure off the supply of cattle in the market. Now this is quite important when you think about where our sheds are going. So we currently do about 38,000 head a week. Probably about 16 to 18,000 of that a week is actually grain fed, and it's reflective of where we are really as a grain fed industry, moving to about 1.3 million head capacity on feed, and I don't know if you drive around, just about every feedlot's adding pens or adding capacity or redoing their mills to feed more cattle. So when we looked at this data, probably 12 months ago, maybe a little bit before, and I was actually involved in a project around this. We then spent about $80 million at Dinmore. So Dinmore was classically a grass-fed plant. So we spent about $80 million redoing some chillers, redoing some marshalling areas, redoing some of our cryovac systems, so we could handle the grain-fed product. Because one of the challenges, Dinmore's always done some grain, but to the level of the quality of a Beef City or a Riverina plant was always a challenge. And to really hit that export market, you need to make sure you've got shelf life, good yields in your bags, et cetera, et cetera. So there was about 80 million spent when, probably at the lowest point of any throughput through that plant. JBS saw that as an opportunity to actually reinvest, getting ready for the cycle of cattle to change. That's where the sort of current export markets are, and you'll have a look. So we talk about the American herd declining. So this is obviously last year. So obviously Japan and US consume enormous amounts of meat. So this is Australia-wide, this particular data. And as that US herd's diminished, we've seen Australia fill that diminishing hole, and obviously Japan take a lot of meat from the US as well. So they've been filling that hole as well. So that's sort of, and your two stable markets being obviously Korea and Japan. Japan obviously soaked up some more. China's relatively stable. But that's Australia as a whole. That's actually ours. That's this year. So this is the last, say, 7 months of trade. So Japan's always been one of our biggest customers. A lot of grain-fed cattle. South Korea, a lot of grass-fed, both in those products. in those countries. And you know, think about product that comes out of Townsville and Rockhampton, particularly, again, very high content areas. A lot of that grass-fed products gets into South Korea and Japan. Australia's obviously only 17% for us. A lot of people actually are quite amazed that we're only 4% China, because a lot of China is a big market for Australia. It's actually a very, very small market for us. So this is the Royal brand that I probably wanted to talk a little bit more about, because so this brand's been going now for well over 30 years. There's a lot of content, purebred and crossbred cattle goes into this product. So it's a 100-day product, and you'll probably find. So we service. We actually added up the other day. We service about 1,400 pubs and clubs and restaurants across Australia, and this Royal product is probably the number one product that goes into those pubs and clubs, right across regional Australia, right through Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane restaurants and trades. That's the specs we have on that. And as I said before, Dinmore and Rockhampton are the only two plants that pack that particular brand. So this is probably one of, you'd arguably say that's one of the most successful brands JBS has ever run, and certainly just grows from strength to strength to strength. And I actually asked one of the salesmen around, you know, what percentage of Brahman content do we think go into that? It would be at least somewhere between 30 to 50% Brahman content going into that product. 100-day Brahman cattle. So it is, and many of you know, JBS was never, and the old AMH was never really a big fan of the MSA grading system. So we obviously run our own Osmic grading, and it's all through your own chiller assessments. And the product, the customers just love it. And we have around that sort of 330 kilo maximum weight limit on it. And it's just a perfect, when you think about clubs and pubs, restaurants, it's just that perfect size when you think about cube rolls, strip loins. Absolutely love it. And not a high, you haven't got a high fat content. So even from a boning room yielding perspective, you're not sitting there trimming off a heap of fat that you do on some of your other types of cattle. So last year they did about 1.7 million kilos of that particular product. Only a little bit of it exported, most of it's all domestic. We when I go back and think about those particular Brahman bodies that we're going through yesterday, and there was a gentleman before talking about traits that are heritable. I mean, marbling is a very heritable trait, like 30 to 50% heritability. As a stud stock breeder or a breed focusing on improving your carcass qualities, focusing on your marbling EBAs, and your rib fat cover is certainly very important, which is something a lot of European breeds struggle with, particularly when they go into that 100-day program. And then rib fat's quite an important factor in just providing that coverage, particularly on your strip loins. So that's something to probably consider when you're going around bull selections, etc. And obviously you've got to weigh that up with fertility, so you can't have a magnificent carcass and forego your fertility in your herd. There's certainly a lot of JBS have run a lot of different trials around feed conversions, ADGs, etc. Some of that work is actually quite old, but the challenge we've got at the moment is because we're stuck in that large commercial production. For us to run trials now is quite a big challenge. But when we do buy vendor bred runs of particular breeds, we try and map what that data looks like. But it's not a science-based thing. It's something that we look at in our own data. We've got our own portals now, so given that feedlot system's been running now for about 30 years, we've got an enormous amount of data on particular types of cattle and particular producers that have been supplying to us for that length of time. So it gives us a real key on what sort of cattle do we want to buy going forward. And I think as we see large numbers of cattle coming through the system, people with the better end of the cattle will always end up with a premium. So a few years ago when you couldn't get an animal, obviously you would have seen a very small difference between grass-fed and grain-fed. Now we're going to come in a cycle of plenty of cattle, and and that gap between good cattle and average cattle will grow in margins, and we're seeing that already presenting across the country at the moment. That particular, I did have that feedlot cattle. Actually, I'll go back. Those couple of photos. Yeah, that's Beef City, literally last week. So, I mean, you can go to our feedlots and see certain types of cattle, but certainly in our Beef City and Mungandai feedlots, you know, it's not uncommon to drive past a pen exactly like that, and they'd be going straight into our rural program, that exact type of animal. And we generally feed our own cattle probably a bit longer than most people. We probably feed on average, like an article like that may be 120, 125 days, just because there is, once you get to a marble score 2, you know, the margins in the market just jump. Like you're talking, you know, possibly anything from $200 to $500 a head jump just simply because it's got a marble score 2. And that's if you're packing that as a separate article. So we also run, obviously there's a wedge of brands that we run. So once you get in and it's running out over a marble score 2 or 3, we'll pack that into some of our other programs, and you're picking up extra margin around the world in that. And a lot of that's driven off the back of most global markets are so used to the American grain-fed product. You know, they're used to that higher marbling. They know what they're getting. So most of our brands have emulated some of those key types that the American business has been producing. So, and as the American production drops off, like America generally does about 640,000 head of cattle a week. They're now down to about 580. So there's a big drop for them. And if you think about if the US stops killing for one day, that's equivalent to an entire week here in Australia. So that's a big impact that's going on there at the moment. So our customers are expecting similar quality product coming to them that they're used to in America, and consequently we're seeing that rise in the grain-fed number and that production system. The other place I think that we're seeing the driver behind that, well, one thing we're encouraging to see a larger grain-fed industry is we can't afford to. Like, with 15,000 employees, we need to make sure that everyone's got a job every day. We can't, but the old days of just dropping shifts is really not an option. But you drop a shift too often, you'll lose your workforce. And as everyone here would employ people, you know how bloody hard it is to even get someone, let alone a good one, and then you've got to try and keep them. So in the processing world, if you start dropping days, you start losing workforce, and it becomes an absolute nightmare. And so that grain-fed system, similar to what the Americans have built over the decades, just provides a pipeline of constant activity for processors down the track. I didn't really have too much more to talk about, but I'm more than happy to talk around any particular questions if anyone's interested. That probably gives a bit of a summary around where we're at and our focus, and probably the importance of the breed in our business, because it is always, given the nature of the position of our plants in Townsville and Rockhampton and even Dinmore, we get a huge amount of Brahman content cattle, and over the decades it's made the business very, very successful.
Thanks, Edwin. And it was just coincidence that we had a cattle buyer on straight after the stock theft section. We really intended to tie them together like that. That wasn't intended in any way whatsoever. But does anyone have any questions for Edwin?
Thanks, Edwin. I remember from Bravo up at Beef, they were saying in America, I think the average days on feed might have bumped up to 150 or 180.
Yep. Yeah.
You're saying the same thing, but then you talk about JBS and the chicken industry and pork, and they're all trying to pull their days back. Is it just where we're at the moment in the cattle cycle, or is that important in the future?
Well, I don't know, but I know the pork guys obviously got a lot of fat issues in their products, so they're trying to lean the products up. I think chicken's almost the same. They've also done, you think about the rapid gain in genomics and genetic gains the pork and the chicken guys have got. So if say it takes us 6 years to get a genetic gain in our own herds, it's taking them about 60 days. Like their turnover, so they're moving a lot faster, which is one of the reasons why JBS went into that salmon farm. Like fish are incredible converters, like unbelievable. I think we'll see JBS doing a lot more investing in that particular space. But in terms of our grain-fed program, you know, we've obviously got some long-fed programs, which is more Japanese focused. Obviously we do Wagyu, which is, you know, fed forever. But I think around that optimum, you know, there's a fellow in our business, Ray Williams, some of you may know, he's been there a long, long time. And I mean, he just knows you just get the best, like for the amount of money you're putting down their throat, you're better off to go around that 120 days to get the best carcass out of them. Yeah. So we probably feed more for carcass performance rather than animal performance, if that makes sense.
Just one more question at the end of that, but if you're going that extra 20 days, you're not so much focused on growth then, you're just looking for the marbling score, so you're happy with the
Oh, it's growth and, yeah, like we'll map, so we want to, our own cattle we would feed, we'd be targeting, say, a 390, 380 kilo dressed carcass. We don't want, like once they're over 420, that's a nightmare. So it's very calculated, and we watch particular types of cattle. So we, you know, for a particular vendor whose cattle perform really well, we might only do 130 days or 110 days rather. So it's really driven around what that exit weight is going to be, but also we know those extra days give you that better coverage in the animal, just a better carcass. Yeah.
Thank you. Look at it.
Rob White.
Yeah, what's JBS's policy with not following the MSA model, as you touched on there before?
Yeah, so look, I mean, many of you know John Keir from past, so he had a blue with MLA years ago, and so did Peter White and the sales guys, so it's probably just something that's evolved. Look, I shouldn't say, MSA is quite big in our southern plants, so we run the Great Southern brand as well. That's all MSA driven, you know, they chase some 65 index cattle, yada yada, which is fantastic. And so they should be in Tasmania, King Island and Victoria. Like, good luck. Like, that's a particular niche market. But when you come to Queensland, you know, I look at the grading, and we have a lot of debate. So so in the northern, so we think about the northern business, we do about, say, 27,000 of that 38,000 a week, and probably only maybe 1,000 of that would get MSA'd. So, that, you know, it's just our brands are just not there. And globally, it's not a, you know, like Korea and Japan, they want to know marble score. You know, they want to have an idea around the size of the body of the animal. You know, they're very comfortable. We've obviously got dentition, et cetera, but very comfortable with the product they're getting. If you send them an MSA index score, it just mean nothing to them. You know, and that's the brands are just built by that. They'd value marble score in some of those countries over anything else. Yeah.
And marble score is also a big part of MSA. So
yeah.
So it's sort of one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, grass-fed brands would be impossible to maintain if it wasn't for MSA. New MSA grade or
yeah,
grass-fed.
I suppose and look, this, you know, there's always a lot of debate around it, but one of the challenges I have with MSA, and I think this is where like my forebears were coming from, is you know, we've got some magnificent product coming out. Like that Royal brand is a perfect example. Now that the equivalent to that would be, you know, it's an MSA type animal really, technically, but if we put a Brahman in there, all of a sudden it's probably a 49 index, but it is bloody good eating. You know, no one would even know that it's in there. And when you look at the MSA index by cut, that 49 is still a 52 in the bag with 20 days aging. So it's, yeah. I think the JBS business just never needed to go there, and the markets were successful, and yeah.
Yeah, so what cuts are you packing for that Royal brand?
Mainly your loin cuts.
Yep.
So that's mainly where it's going. Or your briskets and things like that will go into Korea. But you think about your normal pub club type, you know, your eyefillets, your ribs, your rumps. That's where that's going.
It's at the groin, right? Angus Creed.
Hi, Edwin. Do you ever see JBS say, let's say you did direct cattle, as a producer we sell direct cattle to feedlot, so to Beef City, do you ever see like a rebate type program coming back from JBS based on carcass quality at the end?
Yeah, yes, yeah. And we actually do it surreptitiously now. Certainly in the feeder world we do, because we've got so much data on what people's cattle do in the feedlot. So it is actually happening now. Like, there's a reason why we might preference people's cattle over others. I could see down the track maybe something around the trouble is trying to get a good metrics, but marble score is probably one you could look at. One of the big ones is that, and the grids are always like a discount, but once you go over 420, and some of our competitors don't mind that, but our customers are at that point. Once you go over 420, it's just a nightmare, because you end up with like one strip line in a box. You can't do much with an elephant. So the consistency around the world is what they're all after. So we've got to try and do that. I think one of the challenges we're going to have is if this big cattle herd is there and we're almost capped out at capacity, kill space is going to become a bit of a premium, I can see, or feedlot space or whatever it might be. I actually genuinely hope live exports continue to go, because if that market doesn't keep cattle out of the system, it's going to come down to where you can get your space at the time you want. So we talk about premiums, it's going to be around who's the loyal client to that particular business. They're going to get preference. Yeah.
So we see a discount for Brahman cattle. It's a bit hefty at the moment. So on the feed, do you ever see yourself evolving a more descriptive method of buying Brahman cattle? Like I know personally myself, if I'm looking for Brahman feeders, if I buy a milk tooth over 400 kilos, that's a different sort of Brahman than the generic one that tends to disappoint a lot of processors at the end of the day. Can you see something evolving along those lines to get so? I
don't know about it. I don't know whether it'll ever be a breed-based thing. It's more of a carcass-based thing. So I mean, every breed's got its tail, and every breed's got its lead, and as long as your tail keeps shifting along with progression.
How do you identify that at the feeder level?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we're trialling some MEQ cameras for argument's sake, both inside the carcass process and in the feedlots. So the MEQ will be able to give us a read on potential scores on eye muscle area, marbling, rib fat, etc., etc. So that could be something that could be, but the reality is that's just going to come back to animal specific, not so much breed. It's like I think all breeds have done a great job in shifting the herd to be better and better every year. And as long as you don't lose sight focus as a breed, just continue to shift. I mean, the Brahman as a breed, I mean, is extraordinarily well accepted as a product to eat. I mean, the Norman Hotel had the steak off, the breed best breed steak offs, and Brahmans have won that 3 times in the last 6 years or something, isn't it? I think they've been very successful. So it's probably more around you breed your animal for where you are, but always be trying to find yourself a better type of animal within whatever breed you're using. And I think marketing does wonders. I don't think everyone talks about the Angus. I think that they just had a good marketing crew. I mean, yes, they've got a bit of product, but the volume of meat that the Angus are going to be able to produce in the south is quite limited. I mean, the herd is up here. The production system's up here, which is one of the reasons why the Royal brand's been so successful, because we've been able to take the cattle available in a northern environment, which predominantly are content cattle, and put them in a box and made them a very successful brand. What the piece missing there was it was never labelled Brahman, which in the south they actually put a label on it, which was a breed. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, what percentage of females you kill per animal would have a calf in them?
I'll have a calf in them.
Yeah, and is there ever an opportunity for the producer to get a few bucks for feedal blood? Is there any scope for that?
Well, I mean, you got to remember though, nothing gets wasted in an animal.
No.
So whatever grid or whatever everyone's buying cattle for, whether it's us or whoever else, they're pricing all that in, really. So the challenge, obviously Queensland cattle would have more fetal calves than say maybe some of your smaller southern producers, because they're probably preg testing everything more often. But you get your big, particularly station cattle, you get a lot more you got cold aged cows, and it's just they've got to go. So I think, look, the processors have always got all their offal markets and everything built into their grids.
We'll just go one more question. Edwin is actually on the panel, our discussion panel later, and there'll probably be a lot of stuff that will be covered there as well, and then we can grill him again after that. Thanks, Edwin.
Hi there, Edwin. Jacqueline Bill. Edwin, at the end of the day, I think JBS and Brahman breed together have to survive. We have the biggest genetic program pretty much in Queensland. You have these processes. We have to work together, or else our Brahman breed is going to be drastically reduced. As a pretty big herd stud breeder, we've discovered that our commercial clients are hand over fist turning to flatbacks purely because their product on entry to feedlots are being discounted heavily by hump height and elect, not on the quality of the animal, specifically at this point of time you're putting in there. So genetic improvement is not being realised, but there must be a program, which is currently saying there's not. But unless we find some way to work together, we're not going to get this genetic improvement to continue in the breed. Our numbers are going to be drastically reduced. There's no question about that. So where do you want this to go? Will we have to work together or something like that? That's basically my question to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, you as an association, you're probably a bit close to all the data and everything, but I mean, when you drive around, I mean, I don't see any signs of the Brahman breed dying. It's, if anything, it's extraordinarily vibrant. And I think the traits that the Brahmins bring to the table will always make sure that it's a breed in preference in a lot of areas. And if you talk about, I mean, as a stud producer, you might have clients who are buying another type of bull to cross over, but I think you'll still find there's a big demand for either pure Brahman heifers or pure Brahman bull to go back into that cross. It's I don't know the answer, but I mean, from what I saw, I mean, certainly yesterday, if you went to our plant and looked what was going through the bone area, you wouldn't be thinking that the Brahman breed was on its way out.
Well,
Sure.
it's way out in the commercial areas, in the northern areas. Because you talk to any major producer and they will tell you they have great difficulty selling this extra.
Yep.
So you can sell females, as you say, hand of fist,
Yep.
that are not bulls. They're all by flatbacks and crossbred bulls purely because they have to get pump off.
Yep. Well, that's an MSA driven thing. I mean, we don't measure height unless it's a particular MSA product.
So your feedlots, where you can go into your feedlots, you don't use the hump height and you as a discount on any of your stock that comes into your feedlots?
So we'll have, for our own particular, because of our position of our feedlots, we'll have like an Angus price, and then you've got M1s, M2s, M3s. So there is currently a discount, but that's actually probably more driven by volume. There's a hell of a lot more Brahman feed cattle around than Angus.
So you're saying it's a supply and demand problem?
Price will always,
than, you know, there's a big supply out there, so it's discounted. So if the whole volume of the industry goes back, well, that discount will disappear.
It's certainly what drives cattle prices here domestically is supply and demand. That's purely what it is. And at the moment there's not enough black cattle, so there's a premium. If there were, and we see in the Wagyus, I mean, I think the Wagyus are probably the avocados of the beef industry. You know, everyone seems to have gone down that path, but you sort of think, geez, I hope it stays afloat. And there's always a space for that those products, whether it's Angus or whatever. But there's also an enormous grain fed, and it'll be interesting to know out of 1.3 million. I'd nearly guess there's at least 20% of those would be Brahman or Brahman content, probably more, 25%. I think in the feedlot industry, Brahman content cattle are more than reflected of their breed compared to all the other breeds.
One final question. I saw this in America about 2000, same sort of scenario happening. Do you have any statistics on what happened there, like 20 years down the track? How much of the Brahman industry survived in comparison to disappeared? It became a niche breed. Is that fair?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the American system well enough, but I mean, this is a very different environment, I think. And we don't have cheap corn. You know, we don't have cheap access to grain. So, I couldn't comment on that really, because I see particularly our breeder systems, very different production systems. Yeah, I mean, our environments are a lot harsher, you know, than some of these other countries. I mean, you look at, so Europe, EU is one of the largest herds in the world, like massive numbers, and that's all Euro cattle. And those herds just continue to exist. I think there's an equilibrium in all of this, but unfortunately I can't see, unless we see a mass conversion of the type of environments we've got, I can't see the mix of cattle changing that much. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We might wait till we have the panel discussion after lunch, and we can direct a few more. One more?
One more.
One more? No, you look terribly disappointed. We'll do one more. No.
One more.
No.
I've got about 5 more, but I'll stick to one. Back on the slide that you had there on where you export,
Yep.
is that Brahman throughout all those countries, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It comes back. I mean, in our world, in the meat world, it comes back to the carcass quality. And
So it's all about.
as I said
Yep.
before, every breed has got shit, and every breed's got really good stuff. And it's about what's in the middle. And our job is to try and get the best possible carcass we possibly can.
I understand. Thank you. I've been like
But by nature of where our plants are, like Townsville, Dinmore, Rocky,
yeah.
this is a high content. So
You track
a lot of
right
our
out.
cattle and a lot of our product going globally is high content cattle. Yeah.
I've been like a cat on a hot tin roof trying to understand where our Brahman beef has been going, so you just answered some of my questions. Thank you.